One of our very favorite iTunes reviews we ever got was called, the title of the review was, "You don't like the show, we get it." And then it was rated 3 out of 5 stars.
They gave us 3.
Yeah, we're 3 out of 5 stars. You don't like the show, we get it.
We get it, but we still give you 3.
Hi, welcome to the Women Who podcast show. My name is Allison Fraser, and I'm delighted to bring this podcast to the air each week. Through the course of hosting this podcast in all its guises this year, I've had the privilege of speaking to some amazing people. And I've got a special interview with you today, and it's one that I've held off from releasing for a few months because I did not want to edit it down to the 22 minutes that I'd previously been aiming for. When I started interviewing podcasters for the previous incarnation of this show, which I called Pod Bites, I reached out to podcasters who I like to listen to. And one podcast who obliged was Podlander Drunkcast, which is one of my favourite podcasts. We all have our favourites. They're the show that you will never drop when you discover something else you want to listen to. You consume every episode as soon as you can, and you can't wait for more. Podlander Drunkcast is about the Outlander show, and I didn't set out to listen to an Outlander podcast. Instead, I found this from my sister. She is a TV blogger and focuses on costume, and when Outlander was on a break, this podcast would do episodes about Jane Austen, and it was an episode about the film Emma that my sister Emma was interviewed. She shared that episode on her social media, I listened to it, and then I listened to the full back catalogue from episode 1. You could say that the rest is history. Side note, aside from the Gwyneth Paltrow Emma film, I've not watched any other Jane Austen production, so I tend to skip those episodes. These days, they now have a network of podcasts, so each of their interests has its own podcast feed, but I think that's a subject for another day. We had a whale of a time, and I really didn't want to edit this, so I've held on to the recording, not really knowing how to treat it. So, buckle yourself in for this ride. This is me, a fan of this podcast, speaking with the podcast hosts for the first time, Allison Shoemaker and Julie Starbird. I make no apologies for how amateur I may sound. Instead, see this as permission to podcast your way. Topics we discuss include their Patreon. It was the very first Patreon that I joined, and I did it purely so my name would be read out at the end of each episode. True story. But their Slack channel is a whole lot of fun too. If you want your name read out on my show, then join my Patreon. You also get the Women Who Podcast membership, which is designed to help the most technically challenged and introverted of women start and grow a podcast. Also with Allison and Julie, we talk about how their podcast started, their community, and what they've learned along the way. For what started out as a fun project, they're now in the top 0.5% of podcasts. So let's dive in.
Hi. So yeah, I do this podcast about podcasts. I was doing a podcast before about publicity and how women in business could get free publicity for their business. And I ended up just talking to people about their podcasts and the kind of guests they like having on. And I thought, I like learning about different podcasts. And I'd like to speak to the people who make the podcast that I like to listen to.
How kind.
And I think a lot of people could probably learn from your podcast, whether you think it or not.
Yeah, we truly don't, but we'll help anyone.
There's a lot of what not to do, but we've made it work for us, which I guess is maybe a decent piece of advice, like in general. But for the most part, I think we would be a pretty good example of things that you are not supposed to do when podcasting. If you were doing a podcasting class, you'd be like, don't do any of the stuff that you're about to hear in this recording other than be funny. But you know what? We're funny. So we've got that.
And on that note, welcome to Pod Bites podcast.
Yay.
Copying you guys with your intros. So we have on the show Allison and Julie from, well, what do you call your podcast these days? Now you do so many different shows. Still the Podlander Drunkcast?
Yeah,
That's
the
the OG.
mothership. That's the mothership. Podlander Drunkcast and Outlander podcast. Yes, we thought of it in a bar. Yes, it has been a problem occasionally since then. No, we are not going to change it. Even though, for the most part, there's not a lot of drunk casting anymore. It's more like I'll have a Miller Lite and a vape pen, a little toot off a vape pen casting, but that's too long. Podlander, I'll have a little toot off a vape pen and have a Miller Lite cast. Doesn't
Too
have the same
long.
ring to it.
That doesn't roll off the tongue so easily.
But we've also done a couple of offshoots. So we've got Podgerton Bridgecast, a Bridgerton podcast. We've got Sickburn Jane, which is a podcast where we're going through the Austen canon book by book and talking about adaptations of her work, which has been really fun. And the newest little baby is Girls Just Want to Solve Crimes, which is movies, TV shows, books, anything where there's a lady detective, gal detectives solving mysteries. Is our new purview.
So we'll start right at the very beginning, which is what I like to do with the podcasts I have on. So what is your show about? We'll just go with the Podlander Drunkcast. Who wants to start? Allison, Julie?
Well, Allison started this all because she just asked me to do it. So I think maybe Allison is the person that should explain the Drunkcast.
So my background is as well. First, Julie and I both have worked in theater. So we have some limited expertise in acting and directing and costuming and all of those great things that go into making performance art of any kind, whether it's on screen or on stage. But we also just really like to shoot the shit and talk about things. So once I had stopped working in theater and started working as a TV critic, which is where all this really jumped off, I one day at a bar mentioned to Julie that I thought that we should take what we were doing right then, which was drinking beer and talking about Outlander, and do it into microphones. And she was sort of like, yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, whatever. Sure. If you can get it together, I'll do it. And our friend Aaron Pagel, who the show became known as Janine, has some audio savvy, and I asked him if he would help us get it off the ground, and he said yes. And we sat down and cracked open some beers and made a lot of elbow noise and mouth sounds, and the rest is history. So it's two people, sometimes three people, sitting around and talking about the STARZ television series Outlander. One of us knows the books, the other does not, and we are funny and irreverent, and then also doing some good criticism. I hope that's the goal.
It's very
Agreed.
funny.
Yeah, she just asked me because she thought I would be funny, which I'm not gonna lie, I am. So is she.
No, I didn't. This is a chemistry read. I asked you because we do the thing together. This is the way we talk in front of microphones is the way that we talk in bars.
But I'm also hilarious, so I'm not going to deny it.
Julie is the funny one.
I never really thought about podcasting. I knew it existed. I knew what it was. Allison asked me about this, and I knew about the Outlander series of books because my aunt had read them like years ago and had always tried to get me to read them. And I'm like, no. And then when I saw the TV show was going to come out, I was like, oh shit, this is what my aunt was talking about. And then when Allison was like, hey, do you want to watch the show and talk about it? I was like, fucking A, man. Time travel, hot Scott. Let's do this. Oh, and I thought,
I have a correction. I have a correction to issue, which is
Go on.
were already watching this show because the reason you were already watching the show because it was you and Neil. It was your special lady program.
That's right. We started watching it before we started recording the show, which is to the chagrin of all of our listeners. We started actually recording the Drunkcast on season 2 and then had to go back and re-record reactions to season 1. But it was me watching this sometimes ridiculous, sometimes beautiful television show. And then Allison being like, hey, do you want to talk about it? I'm like, sure, but I'm never going to read those books. And so it became Book v. TV Watcher, which there's already an enormous fan base for this property. And so we were able to kind of tap into kind of an irreverent aspect of like, we're going to watch this, we're going to love it, but we're also not going to take it super seriously. So that's my bag.
Except for the ways in which we do, which is one of the things that's really been important to me throughout the process. Is it's really easy to do pop culture podcasts or pop culture writing and be sort of snide or gush, and anything negative is considered out of pocket. And I have never been interested in either of those things. Like criticism that's sort of superior is really uninteresting to me. Adulation disguised as criticism is really
Very
unappealing to me, because if you love something, then you engage with it honestly. You want it to be as good as it can be. You meet it on its terms, but you want it to be exceptional. You want it to be challenging. You want it to take risks. And that's something that Julie and I also just talk about when we talk about pop culture in general. Like when we're just sitting around talking about whatever, very rarely are we engaging with things on a superficial, unquestioning level. And there are a lot of really great podcasts about Outlander, about the Marvel universe, about anything that has a devoted fan base, where if that's what you're looking for, you can absolutely get that. You can get adulation all over the place. You can get adulation of the books and criticism of the series, wherein the books are the Bible and the series is the flawed adaptation, which is also like the books are also wonderful but flawed.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I love them. Don't get me wrong. I have devoured them. I've read all of them more than, well, I haven't read Bees more than once, but I've read them all more than once.
So many more people are going to approach this show through the actual program, right? They're going to approach this product, whatever you want to call it, through the show. A lot of people obviously have read these books, but I feel like Allison was so savvy when she was like, oh, here's the thing that a lot of people love. Let's talk about it critically and lovingly. And that's what we do.
Do you get much feedback on the criticisms that you do make, like, coming from that perspective? Like, you clearly love the books and you clearly love the show, Julie, but you know, there are some things that you do disagree. Well, there are some seasons which were terrible.
3. Oh my goodness.
We won't talk about boats, but
thank you.
I'll talk about boats.
Do you have listeners who like write into you and say you were wrong, or
yeah,
we get some of that, but my guess is that the people who don't want to hear actual criticism of the property are probably not hanging on. They're not really listening because they think we're being negative when it's not that we're being negative. We're just like, oh, okay, this could have been better, or this could have been better. This was great. Oh my God, these costumes are amazing. This actor is great. This is great. But this storyline is weird, or why are they trying to force me to feel this way, or like whatever. So I think in this fandom, we are offering something that isn't usual. I don't know. We do get some feedback like that sometimes through social media. I have like a I don't know, beef stew of a memory on a good day where like there's a lot of good stuff in there, but it's pretty mushy and smooshed together. So I will often get storylines from the books and the TV show confused, especially now that we've been watching the TV show for so long. It's very easy for me to falsely remember things happening on the TV show that did not, because I can picture the actors doing them in my head now. So we get I specifically get some corrections where people will be like, what on earth? Why on earth would you say that? How is it that you don't know that Jamie is younger than Jenny? Or I think Jamie is older than Jenny. I don't remember. I've already forgotten that, and I got a correction on it like 3 weeks ago. And it's just, I mean, there's a lot of information up here. So we get those sorts of corrections, but we do every once in a while hear from someone
who clearly wants to like the show because they want the jokes and they want the community, because one of the great things that's come out, very unexpectedly come out of the podcast, is there's this wonderful community that's formed around it of like-minded listeners who are in a Slack and they're on social media and they're loving each other's pets and trading book recommendations and supporting each other as mental health journeys and physical health journeys. And it was such a godsend during the pandemic, but it's really been incredible from almost the very beginning. Yeah. So there are people who want that, but don't want to hear us criticize Sam Heughan or Sophie Skelton or Matthew B. Roberts or whoever it is that's their diehard. And some of those people take that very personally. Like, they take it very personally if we are interested in Frank Randall as a character. They take it very personally if we think that Sam Heughan didn't do a great job in a particular episode. And every once in a while we'll hear from one of those people, and that tends to be an interesting experience, because we don't want to turn people off. But if what you want is like everything's great, then we're not the right podcast for you. So one of our very favorite iTunes reviews we ever got was called, the title of the review was "You Don't Like the Show, We Get It." And then it was rated 3 out of 5 stars.
They gave us 3.
Yeah, we're 3 out of 5 stars. You don't like the show, we get it.
We get it, but we still give you 3. So another criticism that we get a lot, because we've been doing this podcast for the last 7 or 8 years, right? So that's been through some very tumultuous political times in the United States of America. And Allison and I are both inherently political beings because we are women. Like, we can't stop the fact that we have political ideas. And so occasionally we will get reviews. It's like, leave the politics out of it. And it's like, girl, no. Like,
no, have you read these books? These books are in large part about women's pleasure that makes them right now inherently political. Whether Diane Gabaldon would say they were political or not, they're inherently political because they are centered so largely on the pleasure of women. And now that we're in the Revolutionary War, it's also unavoidable that we're going to be talking about all kinds of complicated issues that arise in American history that are still relevant to what's going on in the country today. And Outlander has not always done a great job of that, but like, there is no avoiding those things. So yeah, every once in a while it's like, we just want our stories. That's great. There are so many podcasts out there for you. That's just not,
we just want to laugh with you ladies. We just want you to be funny. And it's like, no, it's both. It's like, we get to be funny, but we also get to be, critical. We also get to watch this through the lens of people who understand stagecraft, understand storytelling, and understand like how pieces are perceived, and we get to say what we want. Also, it's our show, not yours. So
I was just going to say it's your show. When you started the show, were you recording in the same room? And do you still?
Yeah. Most of the time when we started, we were like idiots. And again, this is why, honestly, especially early episodes of the Drunkcast, please, if you're out there thinking about teaching a course on how to podcast, use ours as an example of what not to do. We were recording in the same room on a glass-topped table, which I do not recommend. We also, collectively, this is not just us, nor was it just Aaron, but we decided it would be really funny if Aaron did not have a microphone when we started. Like, if you would hear his voice like piping in from the side every once in a while. That was a terrible idea. Bad. Really, really stupid idea. But we at least were recording in the same room, which continues to be our preferred way to record, because Julie and I, we can be funny together over a camera. We did it all through the pandemic, but it's just different. It's a different beast. There's a chemistry piece of things that is much easier to latch onto when we're in the same room. And honestly, even more so when there are other people watching us, because we are both just apparently sluts for laughs and applause. But when we do a live show, That's all bets are off. Baby, it gets real weird.
Do you do much editing?
Okay, well, this is where I can answer your question. I am the person that edits, I would say 98% of our files. I will say no, we don't do a lot of editing. From the beginning, and that was Aaron/Janine was editing at the beginning. Like, he maybe had a little bit more knowledge in what, but Allison and I made it very clear from the very beginning. We want this to just sound like two friends sitting around drinking beers, talking about Outlander. Like a woman to a woman talking about this show that's for premium females. Right. So, like, not a lot of editing, which Aaron was really good at. And
yeah,
then he
words and all.
Right. And he kind of taught me how to like pull the files and do all this stuff. And then I started editing it. And I realized, oh, I can make it sound a little bit better, but I also still wanted to sound like two bitches just talking about Outlander, you know? So it's still pretty rough and ready. Like, we have very clear like jokes for our audience who've been listening to us for a long time that we will insert like sound files of this. Whenever we're like, hold please, there'll be this weird like free samba thing that we found where we'll just put it in because like it's us cutting something out. So very rarely am I cutting out large chunks of stuff, because it should just feel like you're sitting at your dining room table in your living room just talking to your friend. That's what we want.
We also made a deliberate choice early on that was both an aesthetic choice and also a practicality choice, that we just weren't going to be a show that tried to make sure that everything came out exactly the way we wanted it to, in terms of how articulate we're being, how fluid the ideas are, how much we're on topic. So we don't do retakes. We don't really cut ums or uhs or long pauses. Usually if we're going to end up cutting something, we'll stop and say like, hey, Julie, can you go back and re-record this? And it's either because there's been some serious factual error that we caught early enough that it's easier to just go back and retake it, or a fire truck is going by and we're not in the middle of a really good joke, because if we are in the middle of a really good joke, we will keep the fire truck. We keep the fire truck and the joke. But if we're just chatting and then there's a fire truck, then, we will sometimes go back and re-record that. But for the most part, they're I would say almost one take, almost unedited, beyond some filters and some minor occasional internal cuts.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what makes shows like yours actually quite successful, because it isn't that whole slick recording in a studio where there's no background sound. Like, I feel like I'm in Chicago with you when I hear the fire trucks go past.
There are so many of them. There's so many of them. And both our apartments, both of our apartments are near two separate fire stations, not like on top of them, but close enough that the sort of major side streets that we're closest to are thoroughfares for fire trucks. Sometimes you will even be able to hear a fire truck near me, and then also eventually near Julie, who's like 5 blocks north of me.
And when we used to record at Aaron/Janine's house, he also was on a main thoroughfare, and that stuff would happen at his house too.
Yeah.
So we all just kind of embraced the fact that, like, no, we're just hanging out in Chicago, having a conversation about the show. And yeah, you're going to hear a fire truck or an ambulance every once in a while, because that's how we live. Like, we're not in a studio.
Yeah. Although we did add a theme song to Girls Just Want to Solve Crimes. That was like a big step up for us. Big, fancy podcast moment. We have a little theme song. But even that is still just like everything else is still us just making our mouth sounds and bopping our elbows on the table and yelling at Neil in the other room and all of that mess.
One thing I wanted to talk to you about was how you've got your Patreon. Quite a few podcasts do. How soon into your podcast did you decide to have one, and was it easy to decide what you would want to offer listeners who did join?
Well, we're overdue for rehauling our levels on Patreon, like our different support levels. But yeah, I mean, the actual process of getting it up and online was pretty intimidating, just because you want to make sure that you're offering things that people actually want. But our goal when we started it, and I would say it was after, what do you think, like a year and a half, Julie?
It was definitely after the first season we recorded, which was season 2.
Yeah.
So I would think it was like 2017, 2018, maybe.
Yeah. We decided that we wanted to see if we could offset just the costs of recording the episodes,
Hosting
which were
specifically.
Yeah, hosting, which were at the time pretty minimal. The trick of podcasting is, of course, the better you do, the more expensive it gets.
Expensive it is.
But we just thought if we could get a little support and then also find a way to communicate with people who are listening to the show, because actually I know exactly how this came about. When we started, we were hosting all of our episodes through WordPress, which was fine in terms of just distributing. Like, it worked fine for us, but we couldn't see any download numbers. So eventually I had to move everything over to Libsyn, who's our current host, which is a very frequent, like a very popular hosting platform for podcasts, for those who don't know. And when we did the first episode that we released on Libsyn, that was our first indication of how many people were actually listening to the show. We guessed like maybe there were 70 people routinely listening to us. And I don't remember how many it was at the beginning, but it was much more than we were expecting.
It was way more than 70.
Yeah, we were really surprised. And that is why we decided to start the Patreon, as we thought, oh, well, there are people who actually want to listen to this. You know, it's not the 15 people who reach out to us on social media who found it and are connecting with it. There are other people that we are not hearing from that are into this, which sounds like a no-brainer, but at the time it was really mind-blowing for us. So we started the Patreon out of that. And the best thing to come of it is, we've already mentioned this, the Slack, which Allison, you're in the Slack. Yeah.
Yeah.
We pre-pandemic decided that one of our Patreon bonuses would be a private Slack channel. You could join a Slack workspace for the Drunkcast. It's Podlander Drunk Slack. And initially there were
level. At a certain level.
at a certain level in the tiers. And initially there were, 10, 15 people in there, and that was great. And then the pandemic hit and it just exploded. For us on our relative, we're a niche market, but the opportunity to connect with other people was a really big draw. It certainly increased our support level, but also was just such a boon to us personally and to a lot of other folks to have this community of weirdos who wanted to joke around and do all kinds of wild things. So I'm so grateful to Patreon for making it easy, not only to offset the costs of making the show that we love doing so much, but also for making it so much easier to connect with the community, which I don't know how else that would have come about. I'm so grateful for it.
And also just joking around, but like, if you're a part of this Slack, you are getting like life advice, home, like decoration advice. Like, there are people in there who know how to find people to get your permits.
Yeah, we need a dentist, but other than that, that's the joke, is we need a dentist, but we've got a dentist. People sharing their individual expertise, and all. We've got an esthetician, we've got quilters, we've got someone who works in intelligence, we've got tech whizzes, we've got costumer, like we've got marketing folks. Fascinating. It's been really cool. And that is all them. It grew up very naturally amongst this group of people, these opportunities to help each other and share their expertise and life experience. And it's very cool. Mm-hmm. But Patreon, and then they just like look at gifs of Sam Huon taking his shirt off, and everybody
hell yeah. And
unites
also,
us.
what happened to that gif of Sam thrusting after? I don't know what happened to that one, but that one was real hot for a while.
You might have to go on a bit of a search and revive it.
It's out there.
Mm-hmm. It's somewhere.
I know there are quite a few podcasts that they achieve pod fade where they just stop because either I know the TV show that they're talking about is no longer going, or they just run out of things, run out of ideas. But I mean, with a show like Outlander, where we have like short seasons and then a long gap, I won't use the word that lots of people use to describe that.
Thank you. We appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you.
When did you decide that you were going to then do other shows, other things that you like to talk about when it comes to TV? And then I guess that broadens your audience, but also broadens your current audience's viewing habits as well.
So, if I may, when lockdown happened, it was very clear and that by that I mean COVID lockdown in 2020. It was very clear that it was going to be the Outlander content was going to be weird. Like we weren't going to be able to rely on that for content anymore. And Allison and I are both enormous fans of Jane Austen and film adaptations of Jane Austen's works. So we were like, okay, so if Outlander's not around, what we should do is just start talking about Jane Austen adaptations. Let's move it. And so for a while on the Drunkcast feed, which was still quote unquote Outlander Drunkcast, we just started talking about like Pride and Prejudice, and like we did it for a long time during lockdown. And we were like, these are things that we both appreciate, and we feel like we can offer interesting, sometimes funny, but critical, interesting things about stagecraft and how these films and adaptations are made. And so we did that for a while, and people followed us, and I'm sorry, we were surprised.
Yeah,
We were
the numbers on those episodes weren't quite as good as when Outlander is in season. Like it's not, the Venn diagram is not a perfect circle, but they did well enough that we realized that was really our solution to what happens when we run out of Outlander. The other solution is there's going to be a spinoff, which we are obviously also going to cover, but doing those early Jane Austen episodes was a good confirmation for us that we could take the thing that we were doing and apply it elsewhere. And both with the Jane Austen podcast and Girls Just Want to Solve Crimes, we specifically picked things that could only ever be open-ended. Like people are not going to stop making Jane Austen adaptations, and there is never going to be a shortage of gal detectives. So Outlander will end eventually. Eventually the prequel will end, but we'll be in our nursing home, putting our teeth in, talking about Mansfield Park.
We'll be playing Boggle and talking about J.B. Fletcher.
So you're future-proofing.
Yeah. But I also have another idea about pod fade. I started a podcast that I want to bring back, but I did pod fade on because I couldn't record it in person. It's called Maria Solved. And I felt like I tried to do it virtually for a while after lockdown, and it's just not the same because you have to, in that one, the premise is, who are you? You are a person who has never seen Star Wars. Tell me what you think Star Wars is. Go, right? And that was so difficult to do over Zoom. Like there's just something about being in the same room with someone. And so I have 30 episodes of this podcast called Maria Solved that just kind of petered out, but I always know it's there. And I might go back to it, but there was a fade because Outlander picked back up again and we started recording more regularly again. So I have personally definitely felt pod fade, and I know what it means. And it hurts, but you're also like, oh, but that idea is still there and I can still always do it. You can. And I think that's that's the thing about podcasting that I think everybody needs to know is nobody gives a shit. You can just keep doing it or not. It doesn't matter. Do it. Have fun. Do whatever. It's beautiful. It's just we just get to have conversations whenever we want.
So true. This chat with you guys is actually going to be my longest one so far. So if you've got time, I've got a few more questions.
That's classic
Sorry.
Drunkcast.
We talk too much.
We do go on.
We talk too much.
I wanted to ask you what your highlights have been from starting your podcast. So what highlights have you had, Allison, from your podcast starting?
Like personal highlights?
Yeah.
Or
not just the Slack channel and the community you've got, but have you had anything else that stands out as being an awesome moment from doing the podcast?
So we've gotten to do a couple of major fan conventions. We Comic-Con in 2021. That was a real thrill. Very weird. And for some reason, a bunch of very nice ladies got it into their heads that Sam Heughan was going to be there, and they were so mad at us. I don't know why we didn't say Sam Heughan was going to be there, but that was a real highlight. I also had the opportunity at a Television Critics Association press tour. The PBS was doing The Great American Read, which was a TV show where they ran down a list of the best American novels, like the classic great American novels, to try to figure out what the great American novel was. And their talent lineup for press days for that event included Diana Gabaldon. And so I pitched PBS on talking to Diana Gabaldon about Outlander and reading in general, and then got to pour her some very good whiskey because I brought my flask with me just in case. And when I offered it to her, she was like, yes, please. So I got to drink whiskey with Diana Gabaldon at a conference room in the Beverly Hills Hilton. It was very strange. So that was a highlight. And every time we do a live show, it's just really wonderful. It's the best party, the silliest experience every time. So I have loved every single one of those, including the one that we did, our first live show, which was the Sunday after the 2016 presidential election in the United States. And Julie and I sat on the steps outside the brewery where we were doing this live show and talked about how on earth we were going to make it funny.
I had broken my foot.
It was rough,
Not only
man.
had Donald Trump gotten elected president of the United States, but I had broken my foot.
Yeah. So we sat on the steps and talked about how on earth we could possibly be funny, and decided that we would just be funny about how worried we were about being able to be funny and how angry we were. And it's a very angry episode, but it's also very funny. And I think people needed that sort of catharsis. So that one is a personal highlight for me too.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Julie?
For me?
Yeah.
It was when we were, was it Wizard World the first or second time where we saw Lottie Verbeek? First time. And Lottie Verbeek had glittery nail polish on. And when we got up to her, I was like, hey, that shit doesn't go away. She's like, I know it lasts forever. That's why I put it on when I come to cons. And then we took a selfie with her like, ee. But it was this moment where I got to have just a real person-to-person moment with an actor on the show that I was critiquing, and it was really cool. Like, we got a picture with Graham McTavish. We got a picture with Richard Rankin. Like, that time it was actually the highlight was Allison and I were waiting in line, I think, for Lottie Verbeek. And we were talking to each other, and this woman came running up to us and said, "Are you Julie and Allison?" And we're like,
it was cool. That was the first time that happened.
We're like, yeah. And she goes, oh my God, thank you so much for your podcast. I am in nursing school and I listen to you every morning when I run, and you really get me going. And Allison and I were like, ah. So just knowing that there are people out there that we are like speaking to, whether it is making them laugh or helping them think more critically about entertainment, maybe that's it.
I should also mention we did, for both the Outlander podcast and also Girls Just Want to Solve Crimes, an interview with Lauren Lyle, who plays Marsley on the show. And that is the most charming human being I've ever encountered. She is a delight. I've done a lot of interviews in my entertainment journalism career. And oh, hi, buddy. Oh, hi. We've got a dog in the room. Sorry. Hello.
Okay.
We classic Drunkcast. Anyway, that was just one of the most pleasurable interview experiences I've ever had. So that is also a highlight. She is everything you want her to be, at least when she's doing press. You know, who knows? Maybe she's a real butthole when no one's paying attention, but I doubt it.
I doubt it too.
I started listening to her podcast actually after she was on your podcast.
She's a wreck.
Yes.
She's a wreck.
What
We
other
love her.
podcasts? Yeah. What's not to love?
Mm-hmm.
What other podcasts do you listen to? Can you just like name one or two? Just to recommend to others?
The Illusionist. The Illusionist is one that I enjoy. It is Helen Saltzman, and it's about the meaning of words, like specifically definitions of words, but how they are thought of in society. And they're short little episodes, so they're like 15 to 20 minutes long, generally speaking. I really like that one.
I'm a big fan of Maintenance Phase, which is a podcast about the wellness industry and how bullshit it is, like what hot garbage it is. So I'm a big fan of that one. And Aubrey Gordon is one of the co-hosts, and I just really love her. I also, and this is not just because I'm biased, although I'm a huge fan of the comedy fiction podcast Midnight Burger, which Julie is also in, but I swear to God, that's not why.
Good, dude. It's good.
It's really, come on, buddy. What are you doing? It's time travel and outer space and humanism and
philosophy.
Funny. It's just like, it's a diner that travels through space and time and is always winding up where it needs to be. Very TARDIS-like. It's like called to the place that it needs to be, which is very TARDIS-y. So I'm a big fan of that one. And then I do a lot of news podcasts. I'm an audiobook person, so I tend to try to take in my information through my ears when I can. It's an ADHD thing. So I listen to the NPR Politics podcast and Morning Edition and all those good things. I'm trying to think if there's like a specific pop culture podcast I want to mention, but my brain is just all Midnight Burger all the time. Need that next episode of Midnight Burger.
I have another one, but I can only really recommend the first season of it because I haven't listened to the rest of it, but I did really love it, which is Cocaine and Rhinestones.
Oh, I listened to the second season.
Which is
Cocaine and Rhinestones is great.
A kind of deep dive into 20th century American country music by Tyler Mahan Coe, who is the son of David Allan Coe. And it's incredible. Like, you're going to learn a lot of things. Even if you don't think you like country music, you're going to learn things about the culture around country music. Interesting.
Cool.
Oh, and I've got one more. Articles of Interest, which is about clothing, about the fashion industry and about clothing. And it starts out being on individual items of clothing or accessories. And then later there's a season that's all about the Ivy look, like Ralph Lauren and its relationship to Japanese fashion and all. Anyway, huge fan, very big fan of Articles of Interest.
So if you're into costume, that's probably one to listen to.
Definitely.
And what's a tip you would give for beginner podcasters?
Do it. Just do it. Recording yourselves and just do it. I don't really know anything else. Just do it.
I would say make the show you want to listen to, because you could try a million ideas to try to come up with something you think other people want to listen to, and maybe you'll get lucky and maybe you won't. But if there's a thing you're like, man, I wish there was a podcast about this. I wish there was a podcast with this vibe. I wish that somebody was talking about this thing in this particular way. Make that, do that. Find somebody that you love working with, that you can have fun conversations with, that you can have difficult conversations with, and make the show that you want to listen to. And don't worry too much about the technical piece of it. Everybody's podcast, unless the professionals are doing it from the get-go, everybody's podcast sounds like shit when they start. And sometimes then it still does, like 7 years later.
On point.
And that's the brand.
It should sound like that.
Oh, there's a preponderance of fireworks happening behind me right now. It's very.
I can hear them too, right there.
Oh yeah, so we're doing the Drunkcast thing right now. So yeah, I would say make the show that you want to listen to.
Awesome. Yeah, I love those tips. And you're saying like make the show that you want to listen to. What I love about listening to your show, and this is probably going to sound all fangirling for anyone who's listening to this, I love that you've got nicknames for the characters. And I love your scales at the end. Was it easy to come up? Yeah.
The nicknames are just because that
just happens.
Roll. Yeah,
that's how we both like. That's how conversation works for us. And then we just embraced it.
Here's how I'm going to create a name for somebody so that I always have the same name because I can't remember the character's name, but I remember their vibe, right? And then the scales came up. I think Allison brought the scales in. And then we have used the scales from excellent to excellent result and also to shitty result, whatever. We're just like throwing it out there because it really doesn't mean anything. The point is that we're trying to tell somebody, hey, if you're thinking about this, we're thinking about it this way, but it really doesn't affect anything. The nicknames I think are more important because it shows our language. It shows how we talk to each other.
I think the reason that those are so important to the show is it makes everybody feel like they're sort of in on the joke. And they also tend to be like very tidy summations of one very specific element of somebody's character or an idea of like the type of character. Like my favorite of all the nicknames is probably Doomface, which is what we called this like angelic looking little boy who was just definitely going to get typhoid on a ship. Like you could tell the casting department was like, oh, he's going to die beautifully. So we started calling him Doomface. And then this season we got Doomface Hot Edition, which was really fun. Like also going to die beautifully, but over 18 and like a man. So I think it makes people feel like they also speak the language, which is fun, and then is also just this is how we talk. I don't know. I'm also a big fan of the nicknames. I'm so glad that people respond to them.
All of us, Allison and I specifically, but all of our friends, we value funny language. We value funny like assignments, and so we always would give somebody a nickname if they come out and they're like, you get a nickname. Gilf, yes, you get a nickname. Yes, granddad, I'd like to fuck. Like we just know, like, and then to understand that other people hear us do that and also respond to it was such a blessing. Like people get it.
Yeah,
they understand that we're making jokes, right? But
kindred spirits. It's very satisfying.
Exactly.
Cool. I've had so much fun talking to you two, and I could probably go on for another hour or so, but I'm not going to.
Well, if you ever want to talk about one of the other podcasts, please let us know. Or if you just want to shoot the shit about nothing, that is sort of our whole bailiwick. So please.
That's what we do.
Yeah, it's our vibe. Please reach out.
Again.
You'll have to come on ours. We'll do a podcast about if Claire had a podcast. For being the best doctor in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
That would be awesome. But yeah,
we'll make it happen. Thank you, Allison. Thanks for having us.
You're the first podcast I've had on where I've got co-hosts, so it's been good to get two different perspectives. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Thank you to my podcast supporters, Mary Hanlon, Kristen Wilson, and Alice Nichols. You too can support the show at Patreon. All links are in the show notes. You've been listening to Women Who Podcast, the podcast for women with something to say.